Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Buffalo Bills Center of the West. My name is Eric Rossborough. I am Associate Librarian and Senior Cataloger here at the McCracken Research Library, and my coworker and I, and Mac and Bob, are very proud to have all you here today. We're having a great presentation today. When Bob was a teenager, he was lucky enough to head into Yellowstone in the winter with in a very strange kind of helicopter, which he will be telling you more about. And his guest today is Brad Ross, former district ranger at Yellowstone National Park. Bob always brings in the talent. Couple things. The next presentation is going to be in May. I lost my card with the date. I think it's May 16th. It's going to be Al and Pete Simpson, so you're not going to want to miss that one. Tied into the, the other thing is, don't forget, Bob will be signing books afterwards, so come upstairs and you will have a chance to meet the man. Tied in with this talk today is upstairs we have a really neat exhibit that our new employees here at the McCracken, Susan Fletcher and Cassandra Day, the director and new archivist, respectively, put together called Winter Expedition in Yellowstone, which ties in to today's talk, and you might want to check that on the way out. A couple other things. As you may have noticed, we've had a really enthusiastic response to these talks, and with that has come a need to have a better need to accommodate the people that come in. So with that, starting with the next meeting, which will be in May, as I said, we're going to be asking people to register beforehand to attend the talks, the local lore talks, that is. The registration will be available online at tickets.centerofthewest.org ahead of each program. A link will also be shared in the monthly e-newsletter Western Wire, which you're also going to be able to access this from the online event page on our website once they put that up. After this month, members and paid museum attendees will be able to attend local lore talks for free, but if you are not a member or a paid guest, as in you have not paid attendance to get in or are a member, there will be a $10 admission fee for that. So we invite you, if you're not a museum member, to check that out, and you can sign up right at the front desk if you are not a member. And with that, I give you my leader and mentor, Bob Richard.
Thank you. It's good to see you from last time. It's fun to visit with you, get caught up on what's going on. Today, and I've worried about it for a couple of days, this trip is 70 years old. And I'm supposed to remember all this stuff. And Brad's here to coach me and share the current times in Yellowstone, and we'll add as we go along. And then we'll have time for questions if Mac doesn't interrupt us too many times, but he has his stories. He was a guide for me when I ran grubstake expeditions and tours for almost 40 years in Yellowstone. But let's get started, Mac. This first photograph is when my dad and I and the editor of the Cody Enterprise, and his name is Morrison, Larry Morrison, thank you. I need a lot of coaching here. And this is at Togety Pass, and the snow, we know we're going to get a great trip in February to Yellowstone, and we're meeting the Wyoming Game and Fish wardens in Jackson, who have 3 snow planes to take us through the park. Next. This is in front of the Game and Fish office, and you can see the 3 snow planes on the trailers. Pretty dry in February for Jackson, and we're getting ready to head to Yellowstone. The planning, getting ready for this trip, Dad was involved with the park and the Game and Fish to put this all together the summer before, to put fuel for the snow planes at West Thumb, and I think we put some at Lake. Plus, we took in a lot of non-perishable food and put in the basement of a couple of these cabins, so we had plenty to eat and that type thing. These
And
snow
plenty to
plates.
drink too.
No, I don't remember that. I was too young. I'm underage at that point, but I learned a lot. Next. Here's where we got to Jackson Lake Lodge, and this is, they're on the lake, and the road was not plowed from Moran into the park. So no groomed trails, nothing. Next. And here we are unloading, and the sun's been out, and we didn't get up there till after lunch, and the skis sunk into the snow. The crust was soft. So as we unloaded, we were having a terrible time just getting them up on the snow, and we had to wait till late in the afternoon till it refroze and we could go over the top of the crusted snow. But it was quite a project to get these unloaded and warmed up and ready to go. 3 skis, and there were 2 in each one, and the game and fish wardens were the drivers, although I did get to drive and the rest of us did too, but generally they were sat in the front seat, and Dad and I and Larry Morrison were stuffed in the back seat. And they would go up to 70, 80 miles an hour across the ice. But quite a coordination to coordinate with the Park Service. And next, this is Dale West, who ended up being a supervisor here in Cody in his later years. Larry Morrison in the background. And those props are pusher-type props, 85 horse engines. And very dangerous, no screens around them. But you're getting a real look at him starting the engine. Next, here we are about ready to start out with the 3 planes. Next. This is on our way in, and this is one of the cabins, and it gives you an idea of the snow pack. Below West Thumb and Old Faithful, going south to Jackson, they have between 80 to 90 inches of rainfall a year, which includes the snow. Whereas up in the Lamar Valley, they have about 10 to 12 inches. So we have a lot more snow in the lower half of Yellowstone, as you can see here. This cabin is halfway, almost to Lewis Falls. Next. There's a cabin back there completely buried. These were maintenance cabins. Next. That's the Lewis Falls. Next. The Lewis River, and that's a bridge that I think they've replaced now.
Yeah, they're in the process of replacing it. I think we got a little bit more time before it'll switch over, but a lot of work going on it right now.
We're gonna miss all those old logs. Next, a closer shot. It's carried a lot of cars over the years and buses. And you'll see 3 snow planes sitting on top of the bridge. I'm the photographer with my dad, who was doing black and whites with a 4x5. I was using a 35 mil Leica and doing color. And that's looking up towards the falls with the planes on the bridge. Next. That's a color shot, so that's mine. Next. That's at West Thumb, and that's the boat dock at West Thumb. You don't see many photographs, and that's Bob Jones standing there and posing. And that's one of the docks that the steamships used to come between Lake and West Thumb. back in the early 1900s. Next. There's my dad's 4x5 camera and the boat dock behind. Next. Another shot from a different direction, and the table has to winter there, but that's what we use to clean trout. Next. Some of the hot springs and the open water at West Thumb in the thermal area there. Next. Another West Thumb photograph looking out over the lake. Next. Those were the outhouses in those days. They managed to take care of the visitors in the winter. I don't think it handled it in the summer. Next. This is getting into one of the patrol cabins, and there was a scoop shovel hanging on a tree limb, and we had to dig down to a window to get in. And it gives you an example of when the rangers working up there were doing ski patrols. They couldn't go in the front door. They had to see where the scoop shovel was and then dig down, find the window, and then there was plenty of wood inside. But the cabin really didn't get warm till the next day. And so it was pretty cool fixing the meal. You have any experience with that, Brad?
Yeah, there are some cabins in the park where he was talking about, especially the southwest corner, get sometimes 12 feet of snow. And when you ski into that cabin to clear the snow off the roof so the cabin can survive the winter, just like Bob was saying, even if you dig to the door, the weight on the roof is so great that if you don't remove a decent portion of snow, the door is all bound up, so you can't get it open even when you get there. We've had a number of occasions where, you know, if conditions are difficult to get in there on skis, you'll get in there after dark and you're tired and hungry and you gotta do a bunch of shoveling on the roof to get to where you can get in the cabin, but also on the cabins like that where the snow is that deep, you have to dig out the stovepipe so that you can light the fire. Really neat experience though. Some of my best times are winter backcountry trips.
Thank you. That's a close-up. That's Jim White, the warden. He later became director of the Wyoming Game and Fish, and when he got out of the Marine Corps after World War II, lived with us on the North Fork, and he was the only game warden for Park County, and he covered all the areas. And then he went over to Jackson, and then he went on to become the director of the Game and Fish. Tough old Marine, but you will see more pictures of him. Next. That's my dad. Yeah, and we were in the cabin. We had to arrange the summer before to have enough cots for all of us to sleep in. And these photographs are taken at the West Thumb cabin. And that cabin is now used for the public, but it's still there.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I actually grew up in the park. My dad was a ranger as well. And our house often looked like that with a family of 9 kids trying to live in Yellowstone.
Let's go back. Well, this is fine. We're here. Jim White on the left and Bob Jones in the center. He was the representative of the Game and Fish with the Park Service. And he and his family, and we'll see more photographs of them soon. And I might add that we have one of Bob Jones's sons here today, and I talked to him into coming out. He doesn't miss many of my talks, but Richard Jones, that lives on the North Fork, another retired park ranger, is here today and has shared some information, but we'll talk more about that as we go along. Next. That's Larry Morrison. He was from back east, editor of the Cody Enterprise. He brought pajamas. I can't believe it, but Dad photographed him and he was very proud that he had pajamas and didn't have to sleep in his long johns. That's Jim White having a smoke. Dad was very careful not to have any other types of bottles or that type of thing in his photographs. Next. Bob Jones again. Next. We went over to Old Faithful, and we also had one other park ranger that was with us. He was the district ranger for the Old Faithful area. His name was Bob Murphy, and we'll see photographs of him, and I'll tell you more about Bob Murphy later. Now, if you look carefully, lower center, you'll see some deer. Let's go to the next photograph. That's not it. That was a bear at night. There's the deer. Okay, next. The wildlife around Old Faithful survived on the grass and leftover grass as well as green grass around the thermal areas, and they were snowed in. And they were there from the time they got snowed in until the next spring. Next. This is Red Wilkerson, one of the game wardens from Pinedale. And I can't believe it, he's feeding the wildlife. It's just terrible. He doesn't pay attention to the rules. We still have problems there. But anyway, Red, a year after this, lost his arm in one of those propellers on the snowplanes. And, but he was fun to be with and had lots of good stories. Next. And this is some of the wildlife. Next. This is when the road used to go in front of Old Faithful. And they changed that. It's now a walkway. Next. There's Old Faithful starting to go, and our snowplanes parked out to watch it. And we saw it many times that day because we couldn't go anywhere. The snow crust had gotten soft, and we were stuck there until late in the afternoon. Next. Again. Next. We climbed up in the hotel to the top, and that chimney during the earthquake in '59 tumbled and landed in the dining room at the hotel. It took years to replace it, but that's looking out, and you can see our 3 snowplanes to the south of the hotel. And if you look further above the snowplanes, the old wood yard is back there, and it's changed a lot since then. Next. That's looking to the north in the Upper Geyser Basin, and there's a little bit of the highway there, but the other thing that's missing and was taken out 2 years before this was an Olympic-sized covered swimming pool. And I couldn't swim when it was still there, but I could swing out on the rope over the deep water, drop in, and then I'd go to the bottom and push up and work my way to the edge. And that was my experience in that indoor swimming pool heated by geothermal water. Okay, next. That's looking over, you can see the lodge to the right. And the highway in the lower front center going by.
Right. I was just going to say that that's now the walkway, and this used to be the highway. You used to be able to park right along the edge of the highway, and when you arrived at Old Faithful in those days, if it was just a few minutes or so before the geyser erupted, the parking was hideous. It was a real problem trying to find a place to park within a reasonable distance from from the geyser. It's much better now.
One other comment is after the geyser would erupt in the summer, there would be 3 or 4 people that come in the ranger station and said, my car's running, the keys are in it, and it's locked. How do we get in it? We got to be very good car breakers. You want to comment on that?
We had to continue to be very good at breaking in the cars all the way up until today.
Part of the Yellowstone experience, but they were so excited to get out and see it, and somebody slammed the doors. And as a tour guide in Yellowstone, commercial operator, I once in a while would get a call from my guide, and he would say, I can't find somebody. They've been gone for 2 hours. What am I going to do? And we had the vice mayor of Beijing and his family that disappeared. And he had a busload of people, and I said, take the bus, keep going, because the mayor will probably end up with the park rangers, and he's gonna have to order somebody to come get he and his family to take him back to Cody. I said, we're a commercial operation, and notify the park rangers, they'll find him. And it cost the vice mayor about $500 to get he and his family back to Cody. But that's a tough decision that I had to make. And the guy certainly didn't want to deal with it, but he did. I said, next time, keep better track of them. Next. That's a photograph of mine looking off the roof down at our snow plains during the middle of the day off the hotel. Next. This is another shot someplace in the Old Faithful area, and we're getting things wound up, and the snow is starting to get hard in the late afternoon. You see the length of the shadows of the trees. Next. This is the only bombardier that showed up all winter at Old Faithful. It was one of the first that came in, and Bob Murphy, who was the district ranger there, said, I can't believe it. They came in from west, and it was the first one that he'd seen. Next. That's another shot with our snow plains and Old Faithful. Next.
Just point out how much closer the seats are and the boardwalk in those days to the actual rise of the geyser.
That's the first one that I did. And the back end, they had to keep open to keep the engine cool. And they made a lot of modifications. I did winter tours, and I hired Xanterra snow coaches like this. And I would take my group, and I told the driver, I said, you can add anything you want when we're doing the tour. And this is back in 2000, that time. But I'm going to do the talking. And I became great friends with a lot of the Xanterra guides that did the winter tours. And there's still some of them working up there. Next.
While you're still on that, those bombardiers, not much different than that one you saw there. I worked at the south end of the park in the late 90s, and that would still be the primary snow coach that you would see coming in during that time period. Even more modern over snow vehicles that we have these days don't even come close to being able to handle the amount of snow that you can handle in one of those. We very regularly would get storms down on that end of the park where you might get 2 feet of snow, and these bombardiers would come in and they would drive offset on the tracks from the one before, and they would basically pack out the road a lot like our groomers would do. And many days we travel on those roads after they kind of packed it out. But very impressive technology that was used in the park for, over 50 years.
This next photograph is the second story at the Old Faithful Inn, and I'm picking off a icicle. Next. Coming back down. Next. That's a big icicle. And look at the snow, it's all the way up to the eaves. And you're looking back over towards the drive-through in front of the hotel. Next. It's interesting how the thermal areas melt and keep the snow melted for the wildlife. And getting around was a little difficult with our snow planes when there wasn't any snow. Next. This is Molly the elk. The caretaker fed Molly every day a batch of pancakes. And we had to order pancakes or order the flour in to get enough to get through the winter. Next. She didn't have any teeth, skinny as a rail, but she stayed alive all that year. Next. And back over her back is Jimmy the coyote. He didn't have any teeth either. And the caretaker would feed them both pancakes every morning. And he tried getting them to eat out of the same pan, but they wouldn't do that. They had to have separate pans. But that's Molly and Jimmy. Next. You can see how thin she was. But she survived. Next. This is in back of the hotel. Next. They were really afraid of everybody, as you can tell. Next. This is Larry Morrison taking a break and a nap because we were stuck there till the crust reformed. Next. This is looking north, and I don't know if that's the giant or the giantess. I had trouble with all the geysers in that upper geyser basin. And I have to be there to really tell you which one, but some of them go up over 200 feet. And with the winter and the steam, they're equal or better than Old Faithful. And that's about a mile away. That's Castle Geyser there. Next. Notice that we had to put wood blocks under the skis. Otherwise, as the crust reformed, our skis would be frozen, and then we had a terrible time breaking them free so we could go somewhere. These snow planes were before snowmobiles. These were made in Afton, Wyoming, and the Collier Company is still there. I'd love to see the museum get one of these and have it on display here. But and there are a few around, and we're looking. Notice the man standing with his hands in his pocket behind Dale West is Bob Murphy. Bob Murphy had been a ranger in the 30s in Yellowstone and went on and made quite a career in the Park Service. And then in 2000, I was part of a pack trip with the District Ranger John Lonsberry, and we took Bob at the age of 83. I had to do the cooking and the photography, and John took care of the horses, and Bob Murphy and Brad's brother went with us. We went up the Lamar and over into Pelican Creek, had a great trip, stayed in cabins, and Bob Murphy at 83 would go to sleep on his horse, and he'd start leaning, and the horse would keep getting underneath him. And I'd finally hollered John Lonsberry, and I said, "John, we got to stop. Bob Murphy needs a nap." So we stopped and got a nap for an hour, and we finally get into the next cabin. And I'd start cooking, and they fixed a couple of drinks for Bob, got him lubed up a little bit, and telling us stories. And we had the best trip of him telling stories of back when. And I did several of those trips with John Lonsberry with different people in the park. And I cherish those, and maybe we'll get some of those into these talks. But Bob Murphy ended up in Death Valley, and he dealt with the Madsen gang and had to deal with that whole mess. But anyway, another time, another story. Notice that they're warming up the engines with a, what do they call that? Blowtorch. And that's the way they warmed up the cylinders to get them started, and each plane had a blowtorch. Next. Some of the snow in the thermal areas. Next. Here's a herd of elk on the river fire hole. This is the fire hole. We didn't go down the Madison. But there they were surviving, hanging in there. Next. There's an old bull. Next. This is in the Firehole Canyon. Next. I think that's at Barrel Springs. At least that's what it looks like to me. Next. Yellowstone is an amazing place. Next. And that's the falls in the winter. Magnificent, but it's something we don't see. Next. There were a few old bachelor bulls around. Next. That one looks pretty thin. This is out in the Hayden Valley. Next. Next. Fishing Bridge and the boat dock at Fishing Bridge. And two of our planes are down there on the bridge. And we spent quite a bit of time there at Lake and Fishing Bridge, that area. Next. I'm up on the hill taking the photographs. Next. Next. That's the boat dock. And when I worked there as a ranger, they loaned me a boat, and I had a son that was less than a year old, and I put him in a backboard, a cradle board, and a life jacket on him, and I would fly fish out there and save one big trout and take it home and cook it with a little bit of butter and on a griddle. And my mother used to call it Yellowstone bacon instead of fish, but it was like eating crackers. I bet you have had some of those trout growing up.
We used to have a lot of those trout when we were young. My first 4 years of my life, I lived at Fishing Bridge. This facility wasn't there even when I was a kid. They'd already moved it out, and you couldn't boat on the river anymore. However, one of the things that relates to this is when we were young kids, I was probably too young and didn't get to do it myself, but it wasn't legal at the time either. But the older brothers and sisters decided it would be really neat to jump off the bridge, and so they did that, and they ended up getting caught and had to do a lot of forced volunteer work to make up for it. But I kind of got the last word on that. Years later, 2011 was a really, really big snow year. And when the ice started coming off the lake, a lot of trees were brought with it, and they were stacking up against the bridge, and they were going to damage the bridge, so we had to move those trees. So we got to both boat on the river, and we were going back and forth, and with the chainsaw cutting the trees out and getting them to move downriver a little bit. And then right at the end, I think it was strategic, but kind of on this left side where you can see it, there was a big stack of logs that were there, and I decided that the best way to get to those logs was to jump off the bridge.
I heard more of that story than he shared today. Next. Somebody, I think the Crow Indians had come in as far as Lake, and they had killed some of the bulls, and this was keeping the buffalo herd at 500. And they took all the meat and everything, but somehow they missed these two heads or skulls. And Dad says, well, we need to take a photograph. So I posed with the Leica, and we never did get the full story of who left the heads there. But this is there by Lake Lodge. Next. And there's a car parked there. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Next. There's a telephone. In those days, communications was very difficult. And Bob was checking in with Mammoth, letting him know that everything was fine and we were safe. Next. That's Jim White's plane, and that's the one I rode with as Jim White. And it had a 3-bladed prop, and I think it had more horsepower because we led the pack. And next, this is out in front of the lodge. And there was about 5 feet of snow. Next. Dad had to get a photograph of me. Next. This is Larry Morrison, and I think this is on Lewis Lake. Next. This is out on, I think, Yellowstone Lake, and we went over to Mary Bay, or Sedge Bay, and we got on the lake to head back to West Thumb, where we're going to spend the night. And there wasn't much snow, the wind had blown it off, and we started heading back to West Thumb, and we were doing 75 miles an hour. And then power, and all of a sudden, in front of Jim and I, there was a hot pool. We didn't know there were hot pools, nobody told us, and most people didn't know. And he jammed the throttle to the firewall, and we went across the water. We had binoculars, we had all the heavy clothes, and I just figured that it was all over with. And we came out the other side, swung around, and the other planes were way wide of us, never saw it. And we got to West Thumb, got off the lake, and I said, never again. And Bob Jones made the same comment, and so did Bob Murphy.
Yeah, when you started into that, I was going to ask you if you were watching out for the open water sections.
Nobody told us.
We actually had 3 out of 4 years in the 90s, a major section of the lake never froze over around Frank Island. It's pretty common to have, especially around Steamboat Point and some of the other thermal places, to have these little pockets of water that stay open. A lot of the time that's a really good place to watch otters play. But even, I guess like most lakes would be this way, you'll have cracks that will form through the winter, and the weight of the ice will allow water to push its way back up through the ice and end up on top. You know, pretty neat experience to be able to do the ski plane on there. In my time there, we couldn't use motorized vehicles, so we would ski out there some, but you also had trouble where you get these slushy, wet areas where the water would come up on top of the ice, and you'd have to take your skis off and scrape all the ice off after you got them wet. And so it can be a challenge to travel on the lake.
Not can be, it was a challenge. Next. That's Stevenson Island behind us. Next. That's looking at Mount Sheridan and Stevenson Island. Next. That's looking through the front windscreen and Lake Hotel in the lower right-hand corner. Next. That's a black and white that Dad took. Next. And that's the color that I took. That's a special photograph to me, but of a different era. Next. Again, next. This is on Lewis Lake. It was easy traveling on the frozen lakes, and we felt more comfortable on Lewis than we did Yellowstone. Next. 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 We're back at Southgate, and we spent the night here. And this is the headquarters and also where the ranger in charge of Southgate, Bob Jones, with his family lived. And next. And this is part of the family. Alice, I believe, is standing up with Murphy, Bob Murphy's wife. They came down from Old Faithful, and I believe your mother's name was Ann, sitting, and there's Richard and his little brother, what was his name, Jimmy? Charlie. And this is inside the house with about 8 feet of snow outside. Bob Murphy having a drink, and Dale West is between the two girls. Next.
The house still looks very similar to that. It's still there today, and it's been remodeled a few times, but the layout has stayed the same.
Next. I bet this brings some memories back to you, Richard.
I still have that side table and lamp, actually.
That's great. Next. Next. Headed to bed upstairs. Next. This was someplace on our way south, and I'm not sure what, but you could see the brakes underneath the engine. There are two clamps with some teeth coming down, and it didn't work on ice at all. Didn't work on snow either. Anyway, we got down to the upper end of Jackson Lake, and the snowplow had been plowing the road, and we couldn't get down the road because of the snowplow and the cleared highway. So, looking at that, we made the decision we'd go across Jackson Lake. Next. Now the problem was there was 6 feet of open water from the shore to the ice. And Jim White says, "Oh, this is no problem." And I'm going, "Oh, brother." He says, "We'll try it first." And we got a lot of speed behind us and hit it at an angle and went right across that water and up on the ice. And I'm going, "Man, I hope they make it." And we swung around out there. They both got next to us, and we started to cross Jackson Lake, heading towards the lower part of the lake. And as Brad had already described, there were different layers of melting ice, and we would break through them. And we'd be going 70 miles an hour, and next we'd be going 25 miles an hour as we broke through these layers of ice. I was never so happy to get off the lake in my life, but we did. Next, that's Mount Moran. Next, here we are trying to load our planes back on the trailers, and the snow was mush. Nice warm day, and Larry Morrison's helping to try and push these things onto the trailers. Next. We finally got it onto the trailer, and we had to load all 3. Next. I put these in here because the Park Service also had some otters, and they use that for game reduction. And I worked for this gentleman. He was my supervisor, and he was hard on the help, especially if somebody showed up with not a close haircut and didn't dress appropriately, and he got the nickname, correct me if I'm wrong, Nasty Nuss, Dale Nuss.
Yeah, my dad worked for Nasty Nuss for quite a while. Plenty of good stories about that, and earning his name.
Here he is clearing off one of the roofs at Lake, and this did not happen when we were there. I just threw this in to share with you what goes on there. Next. That is what an otter does, and that couldn't have been much fun going about 15, 20 miles an hour. That's Fishing Bridge in the behind it. Next. Notice their survival pack on the back and snowshoes. I think they had a few breakdowns from time to time. Next. 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 Notice right off the snow onto their trucks to go back to Mama. It's not easy in the wintertime, but what a great experience. Next. This is later on with some of the later coaches. Notice the windows are a little bigger. They still fogged up terribly. I did 2 or 3 trips every winter with Xanterra or TW Services with guests for a week in the park. And what a treat for me and my son, Scott, who has Shoshone River Farms, went with me on these. And we had a great time doing the park in these coaches. Next. These are guests that were on one of my trips. They were all from Georgia, and the women had this southern drawl when they were talking to the men, but when they weren't talking to the men, they sounded like the rest of us, and I always chuckled about that. But, anyway,
I want to make a quick correction. I know everybody looks at the word, the name, and calls them bombardiers, but it's actually French Canadian and it's bombardier.
thank you, Mac. That's why we have Mac here to keep us straight. Now, if you look carefully, you'll see trumpeter swans in between the snow there. Next. This is when I got back to Cody, and if you look up on Rattlesnake Mountain, you can see CODY, center left, and when the snow's there, and that's when the old road was cutting around. But anyway, I think that's the end of it, isn't it, Mac?
I think so.
Time for questions.
Any questions for Bob or Brad or Mac for that matter? Yes, sir.
You had 4 people crammed into those snow coaches?
We put 2 people in each coach, the driver and 1 passenger, and anything we took with us. And there wasn't a lot of room. Did I answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Bob, when did they retire the snow planes and shift it over to snowmobiles? What year was that? Do you remember?
No, I had gone off to college, but it was, I would say, about 1957, 58. And they too were made, a lot of them down in Afton. But the snowplanes, because of the danger of those props, disappeared pretty quickly. Comment? Any other questions?
Are you still getting the same snow level in Yellowstone as was shown in those cabin pictures?
Are are you still getting the same level of snow in Yellowstone as was shown in the pictures from 1955?
I would say no. I lived and worked around Lake for probably around 20 of the 30 years that I worked in the park. There probably were a couple of winters when I was there where you would have been able to drive onto that flatbed truck from the level. It's a little bit hard to tell with snow level too, because you can feel like you're having, like Bob and I were talking about this just before the meeting. A year like this, you feel like you have no snow at all, and then things shift over a little bit in the pattern in the spring, and you get storm after storm, and next thing you know, you are buried in snow. So I think in my own career working in the park, a lot of the years would be a lot less snow than what you saw there, but then there'll be winters mixed in between that might even make that look mild. As a kid, living at the south entrance, 1986, it was a spring storm. I know it was big regionally. It's one of the periods where there were big avalanches on Jackson Hole Mountain as well, with the ski area. But late February, storm hit, and it snowed for 10 days. A maintenance employee from Grant Village had left his snowmobile at the south entrance, and we were supposed to get it to him at Flag Ranch, where the road switched over at that time. And he was coming back, and we went to get the snowmobile, and we couldn't find it. It had snowed 10 feet. And so you would get that, but then we also, 96, 97, we had really big snow that time period as well. And then 2011 was another year where, you know, you'll see it be like that, but I don't think it's every year.
Avalanches.
Yeah.
That's what I remember. 86.
Yeah, Bob brought up avalanches, and I'm sure, you know, you being on the east side there with Sylvan Pass, it was probably impressive. I know I worked for Bob Mon before he passed away, and he would talk about 1986, and if you're driving into East Gate, you've got the canopy over the kiosks at the entrance, and he said that the snow had piled up so much, especially with some of it coming off the roof, that you had to even drive around it to get into the park at that time.
You know, all the avalanches at Grinnell came that year, and it was the same thing at Pahasket, like 11 feet in 11 days. Wow. You get up in the morning, it'd be sunny and beautiful, and by 3 o'clock it was snowing. Next morning you'd have another foot.
Wow. Did
Bob?
everyone hear that? Okay.
Bob, you mentioned those planes there's still a few available. Where would you go see one of those?
Today,
Yeah, today.
we're looking for some that are still around. Somebody in the back had found a couple for sale, and I think there's 1 or 2 in Afton, but there's probably less than 20 of them in this country today, because people didn't know what they were. Have I answered your question? Probably hard to find. Do we have any other questions? Yes?
Were the planes ever used for touring guests at all?
No, it was designed for the use of the Park Service and the Game and Fish as a tool, not for tourism. Did I answer the question?
Absolutely.
Good. Yes, sir.
Was your trip, this one that we saw, was it just pleasure, or were you guys on a mission there? Or?
Was the trip pleasure or a mission?
My dad set it up as a mission. Otherwise, they would not have allowed the Wyoming Game and Fish to come in. they said, oh, we'd like to check the wildlife that migrates back and forth and see what's there. And they came up with whatever. Dad did many, many articles that are here at the archives on the control of the bison and the elk and the reductions, and worked with Lon Garrison, who was superintendent of the park. And he talked to Lon about this trip, and Lon Garrison, the superintendent, made it possible to allow the game and fish to come in with their equipment and bring us to do the survey. Yes, we photographed every animal we saw. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Good. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I got to know a game warden up in Du Bois by the name of Cole Thompson, and I got an idea you guys know of him. He's born in Jackson Hole, him and his dad, and he was quite perturbed when he did a weekend off in the winter to go over home, and he and his dad would go out fishing on Jackson Lake with their snow machine, or an airplane, and the government shut him down, and he was really mad about it. But he showed me a lot of film he had digitalized of film and wildlife he'd never seen anywhere else where they would fish, and got their fish on the water or on the ice, and the bald eagles would fly in to retrieve the guts, and he'd have bald eagles flying point blank right in your face and stuff like that. And he was quite an outdoorsman that really loved his plane, and I just wondered if you guys, you must have come across him somewhere.
Thank you. I never met him. I've heard his name, but he was well known down out of Jackson, and I'd love to see some of his film. I hope it's in an archive somewhere, but I have not. It's not been available to me. Brad? Any other questions? We have two other things to share with you. In the next month or so, I'm going to be publishing a new book on bears of Yellowstone. It's called The Spirit of Bears, Feeding the Bears, Black Bears and Grizzly Bears. And this is my test copy, and I'm about ready to publish it. It shows photographs of Ned Frost, my dad, and myself when the Park Service had baking bears. When I was a ranger, Superintendent Garrison was trying to bring it to a close, and the Park Service says, we've got to end that. And then they're just photographs of our bears in Yellowstone and surrounding area. The other thing we're going to do, and I asked Mac to go get it, to share with Marge Wilder and with you if you're interested, otherwise you're welcome to go, is a tapestry that's in their church up on the hill. And this is a color photograph that Dad took way back in sometime. This was done by Mel Brayton, I believe, Mel Brayton. And this is Needle Point, and they have a photograph of it that is really deteriorated with the sun. And Marge asked if we could find this, and we went to the archives of Dad's collection, and this is his original photograph. And can you see it from there, Marge? Good. I hope this is what you were looking for. Dad has over 260,000 negatives here at the McCracken Library, and they're available. Mac and Susan can put their fingers on it just about that quick. But thank you for coming, and if you have other questions, I'm going to go upstairs and sign some books, and we'll see you in May
May 16th.
16th, and it will be the story of the Simpson family, Billy Simpson, Millward Simpson, Al and Pete, and their boys. And I've heard more tales and more stories than I'm gonna allow them to talk about, but I think you'll enjoy it. They slip them by me anyway, but it'll be a fun deal. Thank you.